Hello, I'm Donald McCauley, and welcome to medicsvoices.com, where we talk to the key opinion leaders in health and medicine around the world. Today, we're in the Australian Gold Coast, and I'm talking to Liz Sturgiss. Liz, let's take you back to the very beginning. Take you back to your school days. What interested you in medicine?
In medicine. Well, it's interesting. Well, I grew up not really being interested in medicine. I'm the first doctor in my family. Dad was an accountant and a managing director of a television company, and mum was a school teacher, a science school teacher. I actually grew up wanting to do law, and I did work experience. So in Australia, as a high school student, you can spend time in different sort of workplaces to see what it's like. And I got to be do a work experience in the I think it was the Supreme Court in Canberra and sit with the law clerks at the front of the court. And I found that really intimidating and actually a little bit boring. And then did some other work experience with one of Dad's friends who was a lawyer. More interesting work, but they were sort of in pharmaceuticals, and I found that side kind of more interesting. And then spent time in a hospital with a physiotherapist and actually really enjoyed that environment. So that work experience as a high school student was really changed my direction, I would say, in what I did. And I went on to do medicine. And after medical school, I did start in the hospital environment, and I found it really frustrating as a very young doctor, sort of seeing people come in with a heart attack that you think, gosh, if someone had looked after their blood pressure for the last 10 years, would this be this person's story here now in hospital? And I started doing public health very early on, studying Masters of Public Health. But I had quite a long journey before I started to be a GP. But I've always been drawn to that sort of prevention and I guess the less bells and whistles side of medicine where, what can we do to stop something in the future for this person?
Well, before you did general practice, you did a number of different roles. And as part of that, you did a master's in forensic medicine. Is that bringing you back to your law interest?
Yeah, maybe it's interesting. So I kind of fell into a sexual health and forensic medicine job. At the time, I was traveling overseas. So we actually lived in Ireland for 6 months, and I worked in the emergency department at Cork University Hospital. Very enjoyable, lots of night shifts, but a good time. And then we were traveling with my now husband through South America, and I found out going back home that the job I'd been allocated back at the hospital I was like, oh gosh, I don't know if I can do more of that. And I ended up having a phone interview from Peru with Professor Vanita Parak, who was the head of sexual health at the time, and came back to do a sexual health job. And what I really loved about that was that it was the first time I got to look after patients in their own clothes, which I know sounds really strange, but in the hospital, you see people in their hospital gown, they're very kind of bland, kind of everyone looks the same in their little hospital bed, but seeing people come into sexual health as their own person and hearing the story of what had brought them in, I really, really enjoyed that. So for 10 years, actually, I did sexual health and forensic medicine, looked after people after sexual assault, domestic violence, saw people who'd been charged within the city watch house during the night to make sure that their health and safety was okay. And that's when I did the forensic medicine. And I was part of the first cohort of fellows in Australia under the College of Pathologists who were forensic physicians. So I really did love that work. I loved it in the community, loved seeing people as a person, but it was a little bit narrow. I was like wanting to know more. And when the person came in, I didn't want to just look after their sexual health. I was like wondering about all the other parts of them. And that's where I ended up after 10 years in general practice.
So tell me about that transition.
Yeah, it was tricky. And I think, hospital colleagues, I think some of them were disappointed that I decided not to pursue, a hospital career. They sort of, I think there definitely still is in Australia, a thought that, general practice is really the poor cousin of our hospital specialties. And if you choose to do that, you're probably not as committed to being a doctor and you just want a flexible lifestyle. But that really wasn't what drew me. Like, I really wanted to know everything about my patient. I wanted to look after their heart and their lungs and their women's health and their everything. And that's what I really love about general practice. I also really remember the very first workshop I ever went to as a GP trainee, and Dr. Katrina Anderson, who was the director of clinical training then, and she said, "Welcome to your first workshop as a GP trainee. And in this space, there are no silly questions. In this space, we're all learning together." And I just really remember feeling like this was the right space for me, where you can be curious and wonder, and it's okay to be uncertain. You can change your mind if the story or the situation changes, and just like really working like a bit of detective, really. What's happening for this person in their life, and what's happening for this person who's living with this condition.
Well, then you did general practice and then you transitioned again into the academic world.
Yeah. So in Australia, we're very lucky. As part of your GP training, you can choose to do an academic term. So again, it was Katrina, who I didn't really know this was an option, but Katrina Anderson tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Hey, have you thought of doing this academic post? I think you'd really enjoy it." And so what happens is you spend half the time in the university doing teaching and research, and half the time in clinical practice. And I really did enjoy it. And actually, ever since that very early stage of my GP training, I've actually spent time in universities ever since. So I've never been a full-time clinical GP. I've always had some time in universities and some time in clinical practice. And then after I finished my GP training, then I did a PhD. So it was really my supervisor, Professor Kirsty Douglas at the ANU, said, "You know, Liz, if you want to stay in the university sector, you really just got to do your PhD, because that's what makes sense to other people who are in universities, if you and if you want to progress your career." And I think that was really good advice. I think I did my PhD quite early compared to other GPs in Australia, but I think it really was sage advice from Kirsty, because it has opened up lots of doors and different opportunities.
Well, you were way ahead of the posse with your PhD. You were really, I mean, your PhD was in obesity management, which has really come to the fore.
Yeah. It's always funny thinking back of, what you thought might happen in that PhD. And, really, I came to obesity with a very biomedical model, and I really thought, right, what I need to do is really help patients to eat better, move more, and then that's all we need to do. But I learned a lot during the PhD about the biology of obesity, and the drivers of hunger and satiety, and all of these things we've actually known about for a very long time in biomedicine. It just hasn't trickled down into our training of doctors. And I would say, I mean, now I do give workshops to GP trainees, and a little bit more people are starting to, when I talk about, the biology of satiety and the biology of hunger, there are a few more people going, "Oh yeah, I know that," but still it's very new for a lot of GP trainees. So we've got a long way to go with obesity in terms of understanding it properly as a chronic condition. And I mean, in Australia, access to treatment, I mean, it's really based on if you have money to pay, because there's very, very little effective treatment available in our public sector.
Well, there seems to be a big magnet throughout your career because I see you're giving a talk to a medical law conference on obesity. What are you going to tell them?
I know, it's a bit of a thread turning up, isn't it, Donald? And maybe it goes back to my high school self thinking I might be a lawyer. But so that one I was just approached, and they kind of want an update on what is obesity, what's happening in the obesity space. So it will be a, a room full of lawyers. I think that particular alliance, I was drawn to them because their mission, if you look at their mission, it's around equity and social justice. So that aligns very strongly with my own views as a GP. So yeah, it'll be interesting. I hope I won't get put under too much for grilling from the audience.
Well, staying on this area of health promotion, you did a lot of work on alcohol reduction and the REACH project. Tell us about that.
Yeah, that was a really fantastic project. So in 2019, I moved to Melbourne with my family to work at Monash University. And the team there, we were very lucky to get Vic Health. So Vic Health is part of the Victorian government and they work in health promotion, and they had these fantastic kind of health impact grants where they gave you the topic and you told them how you'd answer the question. And they were really interested in getting more brief interventions for alcohol into the community. So we worked with GPs looking at kind of a toolkit and working with the local primary health network, who could then feed back information to the practice on how many alcohol histories they were taking. That was a really challenging time because I don't know if you remember back then, but 2019 very quickly led into 2020, and 2020 COVID in Melbourne was a really challenging time. I think it's now known that the city of Melbourne had the most days in lockdown throughout the world, actually. And so it was a very tough time to research. And I think it was right at the moment that we'd had our intervention all set out that the first lockdown started happening. And of course, then we had to change to some more online in-reach to the practices. But yeah, and I think the thing I'm most, I guess, surprised and proud about that intervention was when our fantastic biostatistician, Kathy Martin at Monash, she brought back the final analysis with a time series analysis over and it came back showing we had actually made even a quantitative difference to the alcohol histories, which under the circumstances of what was happening in Melbourne at the time, it was like, wow. And I now kind of think, well, if we can make that change in processes around preventive health in general practice during COVID in Melbourne in lockdowns, well, that gives me great hope of what we can achieve with the right processes and the right support for general practice in terms of prevention and changing processes for better patient outcomes.
Let's talk about some of your other interests, because you do a lot of work with the Australian Association of Academic Primary Care.
Yeah, so AAAPC, as it's fondly known in Australia, it's probably, well, it is the leading organisation in Australia for academic primary care researchers, and it's a proudly multidisciplinary group. So we have allied health, nursing, general practice, methodologists, scientists all come together. I guess it is one of the sister organisations to NAPCRAG. I mean, NAPCRAG is way bigger. I remember going to my first NAPCRAG annual meeting and just being blown away at the size and the number of people. But the Australian New Zealand conference that happens each year it's a lot about relationships and networking, and also really nurturing new researchers. So I've been to conferences that's usually they have like a disease topic conference, and they're often very intimidating. I've seen some really awful questioning of junior researchers in questions from senior researchers. And I think the thing I love about the primary care research community, both Australia, New Zealand, and anywhere I've been, is that it is actually more about that nurture, that curiosity, that learning together, that, I don't know everything, and valuing other people's perspectives.
Well, you gave a nice introduction to the next thing I was going to ask you about, and that's NAPCRAG, because you're very involved in NAPCRAG.
I have been, yeah. So I got first introduced to NAPCRAG actually at the conference that was held in Mexico, which I think was 2015 or so 10 years maybe. So the reason why I went was that AAAPC has a joint prize with NAPCRAG, and I'd applied for the prize and didn't get it, which is fine, but thought, oh, well, I'll go anyway. And went along, and the thing that really blew my mind was the amazing methodology that our North American colleagues often pioneer and explore and present. It's really, I always come away feeling like I've got new ideas and perspectives and thinking about my own work. And I think it's been a really important organisation for me growing up as a junior researcher. It's really great to see the global perspective that NAPCRAG is taking. And of course, with the first non-North American president, my very good friend and colleague, Dr. Tim Older-Hartman from the Netherlands, he's doing such an amazing job in that leadership position. And I just think NAPCRAG has been a really, really key part of my career.
Well, looking at the global perspective, you were very modest because you didn't talk about your own role.
Yes, so I have been the chair of the international committee. That I really love that role. It's bringing together members from non-North America, but also we have some North American members there as well to give it that perspective. And I've sat on that committee for quite a while now. So Felicity Goodyear-Smith, Professor Felicity Goodyear-Smith in New Zealand was the chair when I started in that committee, then handed on to Tim Older-Hartman, and then it was myself. Dr. David Blaine is now the chair from Scotland, and the board really values the perspective of the international committee, and they really listen, which is so important for an organisation that wants to have that kind of international reach. And I think, there's so much good stuff going on in North American primary care research that we can all learn from. But I also really appreciate that our North American colleagues are really open to learning from people from all around the world as well. We've seen, increasing participation from colleagues in Japan. The Netherlands always has a massive contingent, which is fantastic because they have such a strong primary care system in the Netherlands. And, we just, I guess the only thing with the conferences and the annual meeting is it's such a long way away. I think, I always accidentally book really poor flight choices and end up on planes for like 36 hours or something crazy. But if you're living in Australia and want to see the world, I've always been a big traveller. You do end up a lot of your life on planes.
Now you have another interest, and that's in the editorial world. Tell us about your editorial component of your work.
Yeah, so I'm the co-editor-in-chief at the Australian Journal of Primary Health, alongside Professor Ginny Lewis, who's at La Trobe University in Melbourne. So Ginny invited me to join her in that leadership role a few years ago now. I can't even remember, but I'm absolutely loving working alongside her. So I was an associate editor at the journal for a number of years before, and I've been on some different editorial committees and boards of different journals. And I guess the difference at Australian Journal of Primary Health is as an associate editor, you get a lot of responsibility of handling papers yourself, which I think is fantastic. I think it means we get a broad perspective on papers. Sometimes if you have just one editorial path, it means that there's sort of a lot of power given to the editor or the editorial board if they're the ones making the final chop every time. So I guess we have kind of a bit more of a dispersed leadership at the journal, and it means that people can really grow their editorial experience. So I don't think I would have been able to step into an editor-in-chief position if I hadn't had that really hands-on experience of handling papers, working with authors, looking at reviews. It's been such a valuable experience. The journal, it's a little journal in terms of international, the international world for sure. But again, we try and be a nurturing place where people are welcome to submit their work. We're also a nurturing editorial committee, growing new editors. And I think, there's been quite a few people come through the pipeline of our editorial group that have gone on to leadership positions in publishing and editing. So Professor Lauren Ball was on our editorial associate editor for a number of years, and she's now the head editor at a really international nutrition journal, which is fantastic. So it's another place to kind of nurture and care for this kind of growing body of editors, while also getting to have that kind of leadership role in the journal.
Well, extending your editorial interest is the CRISP project. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so CRISP, it's a labour of love. So Professor Bill Phillips, who is a really close colleague, mentor, and friend, so the emeritus professor at the University of Washington in Seattle. So Bill and I, again, a NAPCRAG story. So the amazing thing about NAPCRAG is if you kind of have a bit of a question and you kind of want to ask someone, you can just ask them and chat to them. And Bill and I met over a cup of tea, I think, at one of the NAPCRAG afternoon teas, and it was probably 8+ years ago now. And at the time, I was trying to do a scoping review looking at primary care interventions, and was so frustrated at how the people involved in the interventions were being described. So we sort of had, that catch-all phrase of the healthcare provider, but often a paper under that healthcare provider would have a senior GP plus a layperson, plus it was just a big mix of a heterogeneous group of people. And when you're trying to work out why and how an intervention is working, it's very frustrating when that's the sort of reporting that you have. So Bill, at the time, he was having different but similar issues with another review he was doing as well. So he really connected over that frustration. Now, Bill had already thought about in his mind research reporting guidelines for primary care, and I guess we came together over that common problem and then set about working on CRISP. And it wasn't, so the CRISP stands for the Consensus Reporting Items for Studies in Primary Care. Bill is really good at titles of projects and acronyms. He's just one of his, it definitely was not my my part of it. So we CRISP as an idea, so having primary care reporting guidelines was not warmly welcomed in all quarters. I mean, I don't know about you, Dommel, but I can't really stand checklists and things like that. You think, oh, it's so boring. It's a bit like your vegetables with the interesting other bits of the meal. But it is kind of really important, because if we don't have primary care research reporting guidelines, we aren't acknowledging that primary care is a research specialty of its own, that we have our own unique questions, our own challenges, and that if that's sort of, it's just sort of seen as, oh, primary care is just a little bit of everything else. No, it's a generalist specialty that really deserves and needs its own focus. So the thing that CRISP has done has really shed light on, wow, actually primary care research is very, very different from doing research in a subspecialty disease-specific focus. Some of primary care research does have a disease-specific focus, but it needs to work within that a health service that is serving the whole person. It's about generalism. So that's what we're hoping that CRISP will do. It's been really picked up very quickly at a lot of journals. So a lot of journals now in their instructions for authors have CRISP as a recommendation. It's a nice thing actually to use as a peer reviewer. If you're kind of looking at a paper and you're like, there's something not quite gelling or there's something missing, the checklist can kind of help you communicate with an author about, oh, this bit is not quite right for your primary care audience. And then the translation side. So Bill is an amazing networker and connector. So he has really, we've now got a Spanish translation, German translation. Our French Canadian colleagues have done a French translation. Japanese is on its way. Chinese is all done. It's really kind of brought out a lot of our primary care research colleagues around the world who might not, Bill and I wouldn't have met them any other way. So it's been a really nice way to expand our network and the people we know, because actually that's my favorite bit of academia is meeting people from around the world and hearing different stories and perspectives.
Liz, you've done so much. You've been involved in so many different areas of primary care and way beyond primary care. My final question is, how do you keep balance in your life?
That's a great question. I think I'm getting better at it. So I definitely have had times in my life where I think I've actually been working crazy hours, and I think in academia, the work will soak up every minute you allow it to. So it's a job where there is no end of the string. I've now come to terms with that my to-do list will never be done. But pacing it, because it's not like probably in clinical practice, there are things that must be done today. The patient must be informed of a result. We must work on that. But academia is a little bit different, that you can take. I've now learned I can take time for the family in the evening and just come back to that piece of work tomorrow because it will still be there. And often coming back fresh and with a new, after a good night's sleep, makes you much more productive. But I'm very lucky to have a very supportive husband who has really been an amazing partner in all of this. And I think if you don't have that kind of partnership in your home life, you can't get as much done at work actually, because you have, if you've got an unfair share of the labor at home, which a lot of working women do, then you can't get as much done. So I've had that lucky partnership at home and a broader supportive family and social circle, and that's what helps me to have balance.
Liz, it's been absolutely fabulous chatting to you. Thank you very much for sharing so much of your life and your career and the secrets of your success. Thank you very much indeed.
Thanks for the opportunity.